Digimon has always been in the back of my mind. Over the years, many of my interests came and went, but Agumon? This little guy's living here rent-free. After all, I'm that one nerd who walks around with a Digivice in her pocket. What originally started as the cooler counterpart to Tamagotchi would eventually become this huge media franchise over the years. Despite knowing of the virtual pets, I just couldn't shoulder the weight of parenthood at age 4, which means the bulk of my interest came from the anime. Digimon Adventure was this really cool show about a group of children finding themselves in this mysterious new world. They befriend monsters along the way and fight bad guys through the power of friendship. You know, typical shonen anime stuff. Most of my friends at the time were diehard Pokemon fans though, so you won't hear me regurgitating the same decade-old debate of which is better. I was the type of kid who lived vicariously through both Pokemon and Digimon. Despite sharing similar concepts, like being journeys of self-discovery with a focus on friendship and monster companion, I liked both for very different reasons. As a kid, my enjoyment for the series was mostly because of the monster design. I'd get really hyped wanting to see what each Digimon turns into, but what really hooked me in was the general aesthetic and the world building. The digital world hits the perfect balance between fantasy island landscape and computer program, something the franchise would use a lot later on. Digimon, especially our war game, is what kickstarted my love for this weird cyberspace Y2K aesthetic. I guess the easiest way for me to describe it, funnily enough, is just the word digital. Imagine Reboot or Dot Hack. Most places feel like you're in a computer, which kinda makes sense with names like File Island and Data Continent, but I'm getting ahead of myself, aren't I? Having no friends to help me save the world from Diaboromon meant I had to substitute using video games. Unfortunately though, I grew up mostly playing on Nintendo consoles and didn't get a PlayStation until late into my teen years, so I missed out on a huge chunk of games. While PlayStation fans were enjoying the Digimon World series, I had to contend with the critically acclaimed and highly sought for Digimon Racing for the Game Boy Advance. I'm sorry if you like this game, I'm just trying to prove a point. In the recent years, I've tried my best catching up with the franchise and the many new entries it has to offer. I played a lot of Digimon Masters Online, the MMO based on Digimon Savers. But back when I was a kid, I kinda had to stick with a few spin-offs that would make their way to Nintendo consoles. It wouldn't be until 2006 where I'd finally get to experience a somewhat mainline title from the Digimon universe. Only took 5 anime seasons, 8 movies, and like 20 games for me to play one. That game would be Digimon World DS. I know technically Digimon World 4 released on the GameCube before that, but seeing Digimon on the cover with swords was just weird to me. Digimon World DS was developed by BEC, short for Bandai Entertainment Company, a Japanese studio serving as a joint collaboration between Bandai, the toy-making company, and Human Entertainment, best known for their work on Clock Tower. This was a couple years before BEC merged with Banpresto's video game development studio to become BB Studio. At the time, BEC was best known for their licensed games from popular franchises like Dragon Ball Z, Mobile Suit Gundam, and obviously, Digimon. Digimon World DS released in Japan on June 15, 2006, and in North America on November 7th of the same year. The game recently celebrated its 15th anniversary, and that made me critically aware of the passage of time. I can literally feel the clock ticking. Over the years, my memories of the game became a bit blurry. I've played a lot of stuff in between now and back then, but the intro brings me right back in. Small side note before I jump in, but despite its localized name, Digimon World DS doesn't share any relation with the Digimon World series. In Japan, it's known as Digimon Story and acts as the first installment of its own line of games. But for the sake of this video, I'll be referring to it with its localized name. It's already confusing enough with the amount of times I said Digimon so far. But anyway, right after picking your name and avatar, the game begins in your school's computer lab, where you're investigating rumors of strange computer monsters. After catching a glimpse of them in your internet browser, you receive a cryptic email asking you if you want to open a door to the digital world. After clicking what is pretty much the Digimon equivalent of you want an iPhone ad, you find yourself transported to this strange new world. Following after a group of Digimon who are training nearby, you end up in Digi Central, the game's main hub, and the story kinda kicks off from there. Obviously, being intended for children, the game can get pretty hand-holdy. The tutorial sequence itself lasts about 10 to 15 minutes of being progressively introduced to concepts like Digimon, Tamers, the digital world, and much more. I'll do my best to keep the info dumping to a minimum, but the basic of the story goes a bit like this. You meet other humans including Dr. Gure, a scientist who believes humans and digital monsters can live in harmony. He introduces you to Clavis Angemon, one of the leaders responsible for protecting the gate between our worlds, and they both welcome you as the Union's newest member. Your goal is to race, train, and care for Digimon. To measure how well you're doing, there are 5 ranks to being a tamer: Bronze, Silver, Gold, Platinum, and the coveted Tamer King. By going up in rank, you'll be able to control higher generation Digimons, unlock special chests, and use new items. While you pursue that goal, you'll meet new friends and powerful enemies. Pretty much every time you'll meet a bad guy, they'll be working for an even bigger bad guy, simply known as Unknown D. My 3 remaining brain cells are begging me to yell Unknown D's nuts in my microphone, but I know better. Also, I really don't mean to break character, but like, Unknown D is such a lame name, like baby's first alter ego. There's no way it stands for Unknown Digimon, right? You eventually get the choice of one of 3 possible starters: Tsunomon, Koromon, and Tanemon. I obviously picked Koromon and named him Taichi because I'm a huge adventure shill, don't at me. You're then asked to return to the reader room and introduce yourself to the observers, NPCs that will guide you throughout the main story. Each rank has one, and fulfilling their quest allows you to progress to the next rank. Aesthetically speaking, I'm a huge fan of how Digimon World DS looks. Like I mentioned earlier, my favorite part of Digimon overall is how the world balances between fantastic and cybernetic. The game's areas are diverse, but tend to fall in the category of stuff you'd see in a typical RPG. You've got forest, a swamp, a mine, a few mountains, and a lot more. Fortunately, the game's last level serves as the exception to the rule. Core Field channels fully that computer team. It feels like I'm in Mega Man Battle Network, I love it. Despite some levels being pretty generic, they at least have some technological aspect making them a bit more charming. As you travel through each area, you'll find computer chips stuck in the mountains, antennas here and there. I find it pretty cool. Some of the areas are even named as a sort of homage to technology. Data Forest, Packet Swamp, Undersea Drive. I found it very fitting. It's a shame they didn't do that for every zone, but you know, they at least tried. As for the characters, I don't mind the chibi look too much. The character portraits and the overall sprite work are both really good. What's probably my favorite thing though is being able to see my party following me around. And it's not just a select few, it's really the entire roster of over 200 Digimons. You can tell the DS limitation kind of forced the developers to give each Digimon a very minimal walk cycle animation, but I still appreciate it. While the battle sprites are perfectly fine and have a little bit of animation to them, the battle effects are, less fun. Some of this stuff legit looks like the pre-made RPG Maker XP effects, and they tend to reuse them a lot for different attacks. Even though it's not exactly up to my taste, I guess it's better than having no animations at all. Fortunately, the battle UI complements well the game. I'm just once again loving anything that's very cybernetic in Digimon, don't pay too much attention to me. Another minor complaint about battles though is that sometimes the stage decor tends to block the view from the actual sprites. I'd love to attack you, Mamemon, but there's literally a fence between you and I right now. In general, I think Digimon World DS still looks pretty good for a 15-year-old game. After all, I wasn't exactly expecting the same level of polish modern 3D games get nowadays. As for gameplay, Digimon World DS is what you'd expect out of the franchise. It's a relatively standard JRPG with some monster collecting elements. The game has a lot to offer and fortunately introduces many of its concepts as you progress, so I'll try my best not to cram everything all at once. Like many RPG, the bulk of your time will be spent battling wild Digimon. The battle system is turn-based and takes place on a grid where both you and your enemies are placed. You can manually change the position of your own team to either give them passive buffs or to avoid attacks that take multiple squares. I'm giving it a free pass as a Digimon game because by JRPG standard, it's pretty generic. Not that it's exactly boring, but it tends to revolve around pummel your enemies before they do the same to you. My fun was mostly from finding ways to optimize fights so they don't last too long. Like some of my Digimon ended up with some pretty strong AoE attacks requiring certain position on the enemy side, and being able to decimate all of them in one hit definitely felt good. What feels less good is the animation time though. Every encounter starts with you scanning each enemy, and with fights adding up to 5 Digimon at a time, with each animation lasting a few seconds, it adds fairly quickly. I'd probably be more forgiving about this if the random encounter rate wasn't so high. I get that the Nintendo DS resolution is pretty small, so turns map are 2, but combine the high encounter rate with the maze-like level design and it's literally 5 steps before I get thrown to another fight, with another 15 seconds of waiting around for the scan data to complete. The battle area is also weirdly displayed. Obviously, being on the DS, it utilizes both screens, one for the enemy sprites and the command menu, while the other serves to see which Digimon goes first, as well as your HP and MP. But did it really have to sway like that? I would have much preferred a static shot of the entire battlefield, which is kinda funny since the second screen literally has a miniature version of it. Obviously, the battle system, even though very important, is only one aspect of the game, which feeds into the next one I want to talk about. After every fight, you'll gain XP of specific types, dragon, insect, beast, all of which helps your Digimon level up and eventually digivolve. To digivolve into the next rank, each of your Digimon need to fill certain requirements. Some of them are very simple, which is a necessary level, while some require a certain amount of specific XP type. To add on to that, each Digimon has a level cap, or aptitude, which can be increased by reverting them to their previous stage. Not only that, but by degenerating your Digimon, they receive more total stats than they would have had at the same level. So it's a pretty good way to incentivize players to grind to get more overpowered Digimon. Not that you're exactly forced to, the game just allows you to. Make sure to cycle which Digimon you degenerate though. I remember as a kid accidentally soft-locking myself during this part where the only zone available is fairly high level. I mistakenly degenerated my entire team back to in-training level so I could get them all to their last evolution roughly at the same time. Thing is, I couldn't visit the lower level zone, so I was kinda stuck with a Koromon and Wormmon trying to fend off against Digimon 30 levels higher than me. Fortunately this time, I didn't repeat this mistake. During this playthrough, I found that most of my Digimon's level cap were a bit after the required level for Digivolution, so I never had to grind too much. Until the very last boss, but that's something we'll talk about later. Both the battle system and the Digivolution led to another small frustration of mine. The menuing in Digimon World DS is very clunky. Practically anything that requires you to navigate menus takes forever. Whether it's for equipment or for digivolving, you can't easily swap to another team member, so you have to back out of the menu completely, switch to another party member, and then do the same thing. Even though I'm grateful that putting Digimons in your bank or farm removes their equipments, that way I don't have to rummage and see which one has what equipped, this leads to another problem. I now have to navigate the menus again to re-equip them later on. All of this could have been easily avoided if you could just swap party members with, let's say, the shoulder buttons. That way you don't have to constantly come in and out of menus. Despite the negative points I've brought up so far, I still really enjoyed both systems. Battling felt very fun, especially in the later levels, and Digivolution was very involving. That's something that didn't change over the years. I still love seeing those little guys transform, there's just something magical to it. Quick side note while we're still on the topic, but starting from Digimon World DS, the story is a series of games which use both the fresh and in-training stages. For those of you unfamiliar with Digivolution, each stage has their own name, Fresh being the first one, and Mega being the last. Digimon World DS basically fused the first two levels together, which kinda makes sense when you take in consideration that Fresh and in-training are Baby 1 and Baby 2 in Japan. Digimon World DS wouldn't just remove things though, it would also mark the first appearance of a couple new Digimon, some of which would appear in the latest anime season at the time. Speaking of which, it seems the game itself takes a bit of inspiration from Digimon Savers. You can find the main cast for a series of side quests, as well as some of their antagonists through the post-game content. But before we get to that, I still have a lot to go through. A feature I really liked from the game was the addition of the farm. It's this neat little area serving as a callback to Digimon's origin as virtual pets. You can buy additional farms with specific types to increase your Digimon's XP, you can train them there, feed them, even take side quests from them. Favors aren't exactly what I'd call extensive. There's a total of 60 favors, and only 2 of them really matter if you're interested in doing post-game content. But I guess that's fitting with the nature of this area being completely optional. Even though it's very useful, especially with items that can permanently boost your Digimon stats, friendship, or even certain type of XP, it's in no way mandatory to enjoy the game. I remember using the farm a lot as a kid, but this time around I practically ignored it. Being completely honest with you, the older I get, the less I tend to 100% games anymore. I tend to be more careful with the time I spend. As a teen, I used to have a lot of free time for myself, so I could really sink the 200 or so hours necessary to fully complete the game. But nowadays, being told, go there, talk to NPC, come back and do that 60 more times, just feel like a developer quickly making something up to pad the game's length. That and grinding are probably my biggest complaints about JRPGs overall. Which is why the favor system actually feels pretty good in retrospect. Some of the rewards are okay, but none of it is necessary to finish the game. I barely missed anything by not doing them. What's gonna be worth it for you is probably gonna be different than me. Maybe you're having a difficult time with a specific boss, you grind a couple side quests to get a better weapon, but at least it feels good to know Digimon World DS doesn't force you into doing them. It respects your time. I ended up using my farm only for the scan data I'd collect from wild Digimons. I probably should have explained that before going on a semi-rant about side quest design, but hey, what can you do, right? Every time you see a Digimon in the wild, you collect some of their data, ranging from 5% to 15% at a time. This data stacks up all the way to 999%, but you're able to use the data at any point after 100% to create a copy of that Digimon for your party. Higher percentage give better stats, but I'd recommend not waiting till the maximum and just doing it whenever you feel like it. You can always augment your Digimon stats later on. The last major feature I want to showcase in this review is unfortunately one I never got to experience. Before the Nintendo Wi-Fi connection shut down in May 2014, you could battle and trade with other tamers online. Matching with another tamer would allow you to receive Digi-Eggs with special properties, like Omnimon is only obtainable by matching Wargreymon and Metal Garurumon. Since this is no longer possible, this effectively makes a few Digimon unobtainable, unless you action replay them back in. It's still a solution for a problem like that, but if the option is unavailable for you, it kinda sucks to see your favorites locked away. Despite this lack of trading solidifying my status as friendless forever, I didn't let it impact my experience too much. I appreciate the game's mechanics being that solid, minus the whole no trading thing, because it definitely makes the game shine more than the actual plot does. By all means, it's not awful, but it's just the most generic story of good guy good, bad guy bad, stop the villain. While I know I'm clearly not the target demographic anymore, I can't help but see good elements here and there. There's a lot of overused trope, but there's a glimmer of hope, like something worthwhile is in there. Like on one side, you got the mean rival guy being told that being edgy makes you hot and manly, while on the other side, you got Pagumon wondering if his mistreatment is deserved because of his bad actions in a previous life. There's a clear disconnect here, like something good is trying to shovel its way out of a mountain of cliché. Now's probably the best time to do a spoiler warning since I'm gonna talk about some plot elements I like, but you know, it's not like there's much to spoil. Skip to this time frame if you'd rather not hear about the power of friendship. The entire Pagumon story was alright. It's not perfect, but it's at least trying to convey something deeper. One day, this black Agumon shows up to your farm to taunt your Digimon. He calls them weak because you're training them, and according to him, Digimon shouldn't need a tamer to be strong. The only way to stop him is to challenge him to a fight, so you follow him to his home and beat his dumb ass. He promises to stop calling your Digimon weak, and you agree to a rematch when he gets stronger. From that point onward, Black Agumon becomes a recurring character who shows up a lot throughout the first half of the game. A little bit after, because of plot reason, you meet him again at Training Peak, but this time he digivolved into Dark Tyrannomon. Obviously that doesn't stop you from beating him again. He swears that he's gonna get even stronger this time, and the plot goes on. 2 or 3 zones later, you once again cross path with him in Chrome Mine, where this time he gets absolutely annihilated by Mugen Dramon instead of you. Good for him, he's moving up. The plot continues to move forward, and eventually you find yourself caring for this Pagumon, who was abandoned by their previous tamer. At first he thinks you're like the other ones, and that you're gonna abandon him at any occasion, but he slowly opens up to you. One time he accidentally eats one of your friend's prized possession and feels so bad about it that it starts an entire quest line. You help him out and find a way to make up for his mistake. You see this shit, Prince Mamemon? Our little guy's having character development. One thing leads to another. Eventually, Pagumon retrieves the memories of his previous life back and flees from you. That's when you find him in that one zone, getting attacked by bigger Digimon, because in his previous life, he bullied them as Dark Tyrannomon. It's also explained that before this incarnation, he was a Digimon named Antilamon who died because their owner was afraid during a fight and didn't go all out. This prompted Antilamon to reincarnate with those angry feelings of abandonment into Black Agumon. The storyline had a lot of potential before the info dump at the end. I even intentionally left some stuff out, like how the purple-haired girl that hangs around your rival turned out to be the original tamer who abandoned Pagumon. If the story was a bit less crammed with information, it probably could have ended better, especially since it ties so nicely into the game's central theme. It's kinda funny, I've been talking for so long already and I barely even mentioned it. Earlier in the game, you meet Alphamon, who's a firm believer that humans are absolutely fucking dog shit. They're awful, they only think for themselves, and like, damn, I was okay with Black Agumon being kind of a jerk, but is this guy okay? Don't tell me I don't care, I've been cradling this Wormmon for the past 12 hours. Way later on, it's revealed that Unknown D, the main antagonist, was Alphamon the entire time, and that he's been purposefully causing mayhem around the digital world to try to pin the blame on humans. He was the puppet master behind the evil group of kids called Bad Tamers, which you meet and defeat throughout the entire game. And you know what's worse? His motivation were to make the digital world a better place. Like, yeah bro, you definitely showed me by creating a criminal organization filled with angsty teenagers. And while we're in spoiler territory, might as well talk about how the game ends. Alphamon wanted to take control of the strongest Digimon in the world, who's conveniently still in an egg right now. Depending on if your heart is good or evil, that egg will hatch to become either. Where have I seen that before? And since Alphamon used a brainwashed cane to reach the egg, it hatches and becomes Chronomon DM. The DM stands for Destroy Mode. Unfortunately, this leads to what is probably my least favorite thing about Digimon World DS. Both the last boss and the post-game content are effectively huge grind walls. Chronomon one-shot me with a team of 6 Mega Digimon, so I had to stop my recording and go grind for a couple hours only to come back, defeat the boss before him, watch the unskippable cutscenes again, and then take him on. This completely took me out of the experience. As for the post-game stuff, the 7 Great Demon Lord act as a series of super boss hidden behind some side quest content. Each boss gets progressively harder, culminating in a fight where you face all of them back to back. I'm good. You know, if that's your thing, great. I'm sure it's a good way to test yourself and your knowledge of the game. Plus the rewards are pretty cool. Scan data for both Beelzemon and Calumon. I guess it's more for the sake of completion than actually using them for fights, since after the 7 Demon Lords, there's not really much else to do. I just don't have it in me to grind more though. I'm counting myself lucky that Digimon World DS only lasted me like 15 hours of recording, plus an extra 5 of grinding near the end. So at least it's not like the game was stretching my patience for over 200 hours. There's probably someone out there who revels in that stuff, and good for them. It's not for me anymore, but it'd be unfair to say that it ruins the experience. There had to be a reason why, even after all those complaints, that I didn't just drop the game and play something else. It wouldn't be fair of me to excuse all of its flaws because of the usual, it came out 15 years ago and my nostalgia, because plenty of other games stood the test of time better. But at the same time, as a first entry to the series, Digimon World DS did pretty alright. It's not perfect, there's some jank here and there, but you can tell it's actually trying instead of being just another licensed cash grab. As a matter of fact, I think replaying it makes me want to explore more Digimon games. I mean, if this one is pretty good, it has to go up from here, right? As much as I dunk on it, Digimon World DS captured the essence of the Digimon franchise as a whole. You're out there making friends with weird monsters in a world that doesn't always make sense, but you're having fun anyway. For the aging Digimon fan who's been there, done that, it's not perfect. But for the young one who's just so happy to finally see their favorite characters on screen, it's way more than enough. Hey, thanks for watching my dumb video about Digimon World DS. It means a lot. It's the first time I do an end slate type of thing, so I don't really know what to say. Likes, comments, and subscribes are always appreciated. Wanna hear a list of my favorite Digimon? Okay, cool. Botamon, Koromon, Agumon, Greymon, Metal Greymon, Skull Greymon. Hey, no, don't leave!